I'm going to get you fired up just a little bit before we transition to the shorter catechism material. And I'm going to include some lessons here. We're going to insert some of Jim's lessons on the shorter catechism so you can get a preview and a taste of that. Head on over to the website and register for free for yourself. But Jim, another interesting thing here is when Westminster was founded in 1929 in response to the reorganization of the board at Princeton. It was founded as an independent organization. And I have not found too many places. I can't recall a single source. I'm sure there are some, but I haven't recalled a single primary source of some sort of outcry that an independent seminary existed. It's unusual that that people threw such a fit over the independent board, but didn't have similar ecclesiological issues with the founding of Westminster. I would be happy to be proven wrong if someone can demonstrate to me or provide some sources for me to round out my understanding of this particular crisis. But if we're thinking just in the abstract, now let's take away past practice, let's take away just our feelings that are just based on the way it has been done. But if we're just thinking the education of ministers for the gospel as a domain of activity, and who ought to be doing that, you could make a pretty strong case that it would be good for the church to be educating its future ministers, right?
Yeah.
Rather than letting an independent organization do it and then place a stamp of approval. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm advocating for any change here. I see advantages in multiple situations here. But the OPC has never had an official seminary, partly because Westminster was founded before the OPC ever existed, 7 years prior. And for a whole host of other reasons, there were people who supported Westminster who did not support the OPC. They thought that the more reform should have been attempted within the Presbyterian Church. They thought Machen was moving ahead too quickly and pushing things forward intentionally, eventually to get removed, so that there were no other options, whatnot. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on there with the founding of the Presbyterian Guardian, which became necessary because of the fallout with Samuel Craig and others who were favorable toward Westminster but not favorable toward a new church, and what was called the constitutional covenant union of the Presbyterian Church. Anyway, I'm getting far afield. Jim, I know you have thoughts about denominational seminaries and some of the issues that can prevent, although it also introduces the possibility of some other difficulties, such as we saw with Princeton, which was an official seminary of the Presbyterian Church.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this in officer training the other night as well, and interesting that this is dovetailing so well. There's advantages and disadvantages with all the models, as far as I could tell. One of the disadvantages to a denominational seminary, I think, is that such a seminary is going to have to be to a certain extent, non-distinctive, right? It's going to have to kind of serve and strike notes that assuage all of the different flavors within our denomination, right? So if we had a seminary,
you turned it into J. Ross Stevenson, man. You sounded just like J. Ross Stevenson.
Right. That's right. And
this is not a good thing.
No. I understand that. What I'm saying is that this is a disadvantage because this is what ends up happening, as we saw at Princeton. I'm not advocating for that. But certainly what happened at Princeton is exactly that. The seminary became generic. It became blasé. It became non-distinctive in its theological emphases because it got political, which is something that's going to end up happening by necessity within a church. You're going to have to adhere to satisfy all the different voices that are clamoring for emphases in ministerial training. So that's a potential pitfall of what happens in the denominational model.
Mm-hmm.
In the independent parachurch model, you have then an emphasis upon distinctives, because you have to set yourself apart from all of the other independent seminaries that are there. And that emphasis on a distinctive can be good and can be healthy. But then what that ends up happening is you just draw students from the churches that are interested in that particular distinctive. And then now you have a bunch of different seminaries with a bunch of different distinctives, and the graduates are all coming into the church, but they all have their own distinctives, which brings about a certain fragmentation within the church due to those particular emphases, which may be perfectly good and fine distinctives. But the net result, the upshot of the whole thing, is that you end up having a mixed denomination with all of these different distinctives, and that can bring about a certain amount of fracturing within a denomination. So both of the models have their problems. In an ideal world, you would have, I think, a denominational seminary, the church training ministers for the church, that successfully avoids the politics that are going on, that can have a faculty that is united and at the same time altogether approved by the denomination and the church as a whole. Now, that's an ideal world. How do you do that? That's the ideal to strive for. And I don't have the solution as to how you avoid the pitfalls of a denominational seminary while at the same time maintaining all of its advantages.
Yeah.
So the J. Ross Stevenson approach was really as the denomination grew, and particularly as different theological emphases within the PCUSA began to increase, right? Liberalism and fundamentalism and moderates and all this other stuff. It became inevitable, because of the sort of political pressure that we find on this side of glory, that the seminary was going to move in that direction, and J. Ross Stevenson was the unfortunate sap who went ahead and okayed that direction for the seminary.
I'm conflicted on this issue. It's interesting. Stevenson isn't necessarily wrong in the abstract. At the same time, why he's saying what he's saying, because he wants to broaden the church. And for 110 years plus, it hadn't, been that big of a problem. Princeton has always been known as a bastion of conservative orthodoxy, and there were other seminaries serving the Presbyterian Church. But it just so happened that once Stevenson became president, and then, with Charles Erdman, his buddy, they were laboring. They wanted to broaden the church, or broaden the seminary, so that it would be representative of the entire church, which included unbelief in it, included modernism. That was a problem. So veiled within his idea of making the seminary more representative was included the idea to have room for people who denied the fundamentals, very basic things about the faith. So total mess, but
yeah. And I think that there's a way in which you can think about a denominational seminary that serves the church as a whole, that is properly diverse, right? So obviously all forms of unbelief wouldn't fit. I mean, you wouldn't have Arminian faculty or liberal faculty or Bardian faculty, right? But you would have within, confessional bounds, you're going to have, the sort of Dutch Bavinkian emphasis, perhaps the Vossian biblical theological emphases. You would have the, Puritan emphases that you see at a place like Greenville or Puritan Seminary. I guess that would be an appropriate form of diversity within a seminary.
Yeah.
That would be okay. But obviously, there are bad things out there that you don't want to say, hey, let's throw that into the diversity mix. Hey, we don't have any Bardians represented on faculty. Why don't we get one of them? No, that's not the kind of diversity that you want to have. But there is an appropriate approach. And I do think that it should be the church training ministers for the church. I think that in principle, that's the right way to think. How you execute on that in a good, effective way that's faithful and all that, I don't have the solution to that.